let's say they plan to play a Beethoven sonata. So they practice for years in order to be able to play well. And yet with happiness, somehow people think that if they decide to be happy, then they can just be happy like that without planning and without practice, without working hard. Now, happiness is a skill.
Welcome back to the Max Out Show, where today I'm joined by an absolute superstar in the fields of happiness, positive psychology, and peak performance, Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar. After graduating from Harvard with a PhD in organizational behavior, Tal went on to teach the most popular course in the history of Harvard University, write multiple groundbreaking books, and speak to thousands of people around the world on what it takes to bring happiness to life. So Tal, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Max. It's great to be here.
Now, one of the reasons I'm so excited to have you today is not just because of your amazing insights around what it takes to raise life to the next level, but also because both of us had a very similar journey to happiness, in the sense that both of us used athletics, professional athletics, earlier on in our lives as almost a vehicle to achieve happiness. And so can you share a little bit about with our listeners about your former life as a professional squash player and how that translated into you then studying psychology and happiness?
Yes, of course. So I started playing squash at the age of 11, but before that I was a committed athlete. I played tennis and I did track and played soccer. I loved sports and still do. However, I remember that throughout my career or as a professional and before that training, I felt constant stress. And the stress was relieved only after tournaments were over and I happened to do well, or after a very good training session. But in general, the stress was ongoing. And even though I loved the sports and it was very meaningful to me, I was not overall happy. And I thought that I would be happy when I win the big championship. And for me, the big championship, initially at least, was winning the Israeli national championship, which is, I'm from Israel. And on it, I was indeed very happy, but only for a few hours. So it was a short-lived relief. And I discovered going on later on in life, playing more professional squash, and then later on accomplishing things professionally in education, that whenever I would succeed according to my expectations, I would be happy, but it was only short-lived. And I realized that formula of success equals happiness, that formula doesn't work. And it was when I realized that I decided to study psychology, because I wanted to figure out that formula.
Yeah, I loved it. I think this idea of hedonic adaptation is such a central one. And if you want to really live a happy life, because I see so many people out there, they're striving for these huge goals, basically slaving away every day of their lives, trying to at one point reach happiness. But the problem is it always moves ahead, right? You're never going to be totally satisfied when you're successful at athletics or in business or wherever else. So I think that's such an important point here. So for you in the beginning, studying psychology, was it really like more of a personal thing? Like you just wanted to find out what makes me happy?
At the beginning, when I started, it was 100% a personal thing.
Yes.
I was in pain. I was unhappy. I was in pain. I was unhappy, and I wanted to figure out why. That was my primary motivation.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So how did studying positivity and how did studying psychology actually impact your life? Like, what were some of the most important lessons that maybe would also be interesting for our listeners here on how we can actually live a happy life?
So the first thing that I learned about was the reverse relationship between success and happiness. So while success does not lead to happiness, at least not to long-term happiness, happiness does lead to more success. So if I increase levels of well-being, if you're talking about a business, the profits actually go up when happiness go up. If you're talking about schools, grades go up. So it's not that happiness leads to success, but rather success leads to happiness. The question then remains, how do we increase levels of happiness? And there are many answers. One thing, for example, which is related to sports is that physical activity is a very important component of a happy life. Physical exercise, even just 3 times a week of 30, 40 minutes of aerobic exercise can go a long way. Meditation contributes to happiness. Relationships are the number one predictor of happiness. So quality time we spend with people we care about and who care about us, not virtually, but really face to face. These relationships contribute to happiness. And then perhaps first and foremost, the most important thing for a happy life is being open to embracing and accepting painful emotions, because they're also part of life, of any life.
Oh, I love that. That's such a good point. And I mean, the first three seem so almost obvious at this point, right? Like we all know we should be exercising, we should be meditating. But what the last point about embracing difficult emotions? How can people do that when they're in this slump and they're experiencing pain or suffering or sadness, depression? How can people deal with those emotions and at the same time accept that that is part of life and part of happiness?
Part of the reason why it's so hard for so many people to deal with difficulties and hardships is because of what they see around them. So, we go on social media and we see everyone is smiling, everyone is happy, everyone is leading seemingly perfect life, except for us.
Yeah.
And then we feel inadequate and we feel frustrated. And we say, what's wrong with us, we ask, not realizing that something would be wrong with us if we did not experience painful emotions at times. So the paradox here is that when we embrace these emotions as natural, we'll actually have less of them. We'll be able to overcome them. You see, the way embracing emotions works, it strengthens our psychological immune system. What does it mean to have a strong immune system? Having a strong immune system doesn't mean we don't get sick. It simply means we get sick less often, and when we do get sick, we recover more promptly. And it's the same with the psychological immune system. Accepting, embracing painful emotions, doing everything right in every way will not mean we do not experience painful emotions. It simply means we experience less of it, and when we experience it, we overcome it more promptly. So when we embrace our painful emotions, truly, genuinely embrace them, then we are in the best position to lead a happy life, with all the ups and downs, of course, but an overall happy life.
Oh, I love that so much. And it's interesting, because usually when I tell people I study happiness, right? I study positive psychology. What they usually tell me is like, but I'm not supposed to be happy like 100% of the time, right? I think that's such an important point, is that like negative emotions are a valuable part of life. In fact, oftentimes they can teach us stuff, right? They can teach us lessons about life. And so trying to be happy 100% of the time is usually just some kind of recipe for actual failure and misery, right? Because we, like you say, we look at all these seemingly perfect lives out there, and we look at ourselves and realize it's not measuring up, right? But just realizing that everyone is unhappy and everyone is sad at times, I think is so valuable. And also what is reminding me of is, as you mentioned before, this inverse relationship between happiness and success, right? And what it reminded me of is this idea that the ultimate currency in life, as you mentioned before, is not money, but actually happiness. So what we're actually all striving for at the end of the day is not so much, having a large bank account, but having large amounts of happiness in our lives. And so how can people distinguish between, those means and those ends in their lives and really find more of the happiness they seek?
So the question we need to ask ourselves, and the sooner we do it, the better, because very often people ask themselves this question towards the end of their lives when they have gone through a lot. So the question we need to ask ourselves, and again, the sooner the better, is what's really important? What's really valuable? What are the things that are really meaningful to me in my life? And if we ask this question, if we truly think about it, then we'll come up with things such as, friends and family, things such as work, but a particular kind of work. So it could be athletics, it's sports, it could be, to start a business, it could be to go and volunteer. It really doesn't matter what the answer is. The most important thing is that we think about the question. And the thing is, most people do not think about it enough, meaning they're on a treadmill, they are on autopilot, and they're just doing mostly what is expected to them of what society deems important. Yes, for some people, it may be important to have a very successful business or to make a lot of money, which is great. Let them follow this dream. For many people, there are other dreams. And unfortunately, those many people very often don't pursue those dreams. So stopping and thinking, that is a key element of a happy life. And after stopping to think, then going into action full steam ahead.
Oh, I love that, because I think there's this piece of clarity that people are usually missing, right? So when I usually run workshops for companies, right, on happiness, usually the first thing I ask people is, who in here wants to be happy? And everyone hand goes up, right? Because everyone wants to be happy. And then I ask them, so who here has like a happiness plan or strategy? And people usually give me these blank stares, right? Because they're just like, what do you mean a happiness plan? But I think it's like in any area of our lives, usually if we want to get good at it, we get some kind of plan. So we want to run a marathon, we get a training plan. We want to, lose weight, we get a diet plan. But for whatever reason, when it comes to happiness, people don't really use the same conceptualization, don't approach it the same way. So why do you think it is that people are more willing to plan their next vacation, but less willing to actually plan their own lives and really ask themselves those hard questions of what is actually going to make me happy?
One of the reasons is that, and I want to just add to what you said, because it's not just about the plan; it's also about the execution of the plan.
Sure.
So let's say someone says, "I want to run a marathon." Yes, they plan on running a marathon, and then they practice. They train every day. They run, 100 kilometers a week, or let's say they plan to play a Beethoven sonata. So they practice for years in order to be able to play well. And yet with happiness, somehow people think that if they decide to be happy, then they can just be happy like that without planning and without practice, without working hard. Now, happiness is a skill. There are neural pathways in the brain that are associated with playing a musical piece, just like there are neural pathways in the brain associated with leading a life of gratitude and appreciation and being overall happy. And the thing is, we have to train our mind. We have to train our hands when it comes to playing a piece of music or when it comes to happiness. So people have a misperception that happiness is just a decision. Okay, I decided to be happy and now I'll be happy. And yet the decision is important, just like it's important to decide to be a musician or to decide to be an athlete or a successful business person. So a decision is important. However, it's only a first step. And I'd like to add here, because it's not just perception. It also when it comes to relationships. People decide that they will live happily ever after, but that decision is not enough. You need to invest in your relationship, just like you need to invest at work or playing music or running a marathon. So it seems like when it comes to those psychological skills, people have a deep misunderstanding of what it takes to excel in those areas.
Wow, I absolutely love that. This idea that psychological skills like happiness or having good relationships actually takes the same amount of work as going to the gym and trying to be strong and fit. And there's this great quote, it's my favorite quote by Alexis Carrel. He said, "Man cannot remake himself without suffering, for he is both the marble and the sculptor." And that's really what to me it gets at, right? It's like, if you're trying to change, it's going to require work. It's going to require some kind of short-term pain and delaying immediate gratification when you go out for that run or when you eat that healthy food or when you sit down to meditate, right? It's not necessarily pleasurable in the moment, but afterwards and over the long term, we're going to experience a lot more happiness. So how can we sort of find the balance between the two, between suffering in the short term and find that long-term happiness that we seek?
Yeah, so I'm not a fan of suffering. Don't think we should look for suffering. However, unfortunately, sometimes suffering finds us. Ideally, the way to a destination that we deem valuable and worthy. let me give you a simple example from, well, a couple of examples. One from relationships. So I've been, married for almost 20 years.
Wow.
My wife and I invest in the relationship. Yes, we have our ups and downs, like every relationship does. It means to work hard. It means to go on dates together, to talk together, to spend time together. Yesterday we went biking together. It's to do things together. Now, this means investing in the relationship. Now, is that suffering? Is biking with my wife suffering? Is spending time with her
Hopefully not.
suffering? Of course not. It's pleasurable. It's enjoyable. And we're investing in the future together while we're doing it. I'll give you another example. I work very hard. This morning I spent 3 hours building a workshop for teachers. I've been doing this for many years. Every day I work and I invest in it. I'm preparing for a workshop in the future. I'm preparing for for more success, hopefully in the future. At the same time, I also enjoy what I do overall. Not every moment of it. There are times when I just want to watch TV or do nothing. But I tell myself that yes, it's important to invest and to work hard. So what I'm saying here is that success is a combination. It's a combination of difficult times and hopefully also of enjoyable times. And we must be prepared for both. Ideally, in a perfect world, we would be enjoying every minute of the way on the path to a better future. But it's not perfect, and we have to also embrace the difficulties and hardships and failures, so on. So it's not just suffering in the moment that leads us to success in the long term. However, it is also suffering and pain in the moment that is sometimes necessary.
Yes, for sure. And so the best definition I think that I've ever heard about happiness actually came from one of your books, when you said happiness is the experience of climbing toward the peak. So it's this mix of pleasure and meaning at the same time. So can you share a little bit about that, about how we can combine those two things together to actually live a happy life?
Sure. So going back to my sports experience, when I played squash, becoming a professional, winning championships was certainly a very meaningful, a very meaningful goal, very meaningful objective for me. In fact, I remember when I was 16 years old, so it's more than 30 years ago. I remember having that thought, saying to myself, "What am I going to do when I no longer play squash? What meaning will there be in my life when I no longer have squash?" Because that was my everything at that time in my life. And of course, later on, it was no longer that, even though I still love sports. But at that time, it was very meaningful. At the same time, I did not enjoy the process. Most training sessions were painful, and not just painful because I trained hard, but painful psychologically, emotionalism, because of my inability to embrace the moment, because I was always in the future and never really focusing on the present moment. So I wasn't happy during that period. So that's future benefit, that I'm working hard for a better future, but no present benefit. In other words, it's meaningful, but not pleasurable. Ideally, would have been if I'd also overall enjoyed playing squash the day to day, and then still found the goal meaningful. Today, because while I do work very hard and invest much in my work, I also really enjoy, I love reading, I love writing, I love teaching. Yes, I have my ups and downs like we all do, but overall, I love the experience of it. And what I'm doing is very meaningful to me. In other words, I strive for more and more future goals and accomplishments. So it's the combination of both present pleasure and future meaning, and that to me is what happiness is all about. And I'm repeating once again, not without the difficulties and hardships and the pain and even the suffering at times, because these are important elements of any life. And this is probably the number one misunderstood aspect of a happy life.
Yeah, absolutely love that. And what it reminds me of is this idea that you brought in one of your books of lifelines versus deadlines. So can you tell us a little bit about that, about how we can actually set goals in our lives that excite us and bring us to life?
Sure. So this idea of a lifeline versus a deadline, it's actually my wife's idea. Who, both of us set deadlines, and she suddenly came up with this idea and said, "Look, I mean, this is goals are not about dead lines; they're about lifelines. Why? Because goals provide us with a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, and they enliven us in many ways. And this is a big if these goals are what psychologists call self-concordant. Self-concordant goals are goals that are personally meaningful, that are aligned with our values. There are goals that do not primarily come from the outside, they come from the inside. Because, for example, if I want to be a professor at a university, however, if they really think about it, that is not their goal. That is something that their parents gave them, or something that they think they should want, but it's not really their goal. But for someone else, being a professor may be a self-concordant goal, meaning something that they're really passionate and interested in. And when we find whatever that self-concordant goal is for us, that goal that is aligned with our passions, that is aligned with our strength, when we find these goals, set them, and then pursue them, that is what brings us to life. These are our lifelines.
So it seems like there's a huge amount of self-awareness that's needed, and really understanding ourselves, understanding our skill sets, understanding our talents and our passions, to really figure out, hey, is this thing that I'm about to do, whether it's, like you said, becoming a professor or going into athletics or business or whatever, is it actually the thing that I want and that I'm going to be good at and that I'm going to enjoy? Or is it something that like you mentioned before, other people's opinions and other people's thoughts and ideas have just sort of made me to do? And so I'm really curious, because you've been obviously incredibly successful in this field. So what does your goal setting routine look like? So how do you set lifelines in your life and make sure that you set these incredible goals, but also achieve them at the same time while enjoying the process of doing that?
Yeah, so a few things about this, Max. The first thing is that let me share a story with you to illustrate my point. So I was applying for a position. This was a few years ago. I was applying for a position with a company that I really, really, really wanted to work for. This was a huge deal for me. And, I wrote a proposal and rewrote it and sent it to my friends and colleagues who commented on it. I sent it over to the company. They invited me in for an interview, and the interview went really well. And I was excited about it. It seems like they were excited about me. And a month went by, and I was waiting, anticipating the response. And when the response came, they said, thank you very much. We think, it was a great proposal, but we decided to go in a different direction. This was devastating for me. And I remember sitting down in our dining room at home, and my head down, really, really feeling upset. And my wife came to me to console me, and we were just talking. And then she asked me a question, and the question was, she said, "Do your students know how often you fail?" And it was a very important question. And the answer was no, they don't, because what do they see? On stage, they see a successful teacher, with the largest class at the university, with best-selling books, with, a wonderful family. So they see, it looks all great. What they do not see are the many failures along the way. And ever since then, and as I said, this was a few years ago, ever since then, I've been emphasizing my failures just as I emphasize the successes. I'm proud of the successes. I'm also proud of the failures, because I put myself on the line and I tried. And one of the sentences, one of the mantras mantras that I repeat over and over and over again to myself, to my children, to my clients and students is learn to fail or fail to learn. Learn to fail or fail to learn.
Love that.
You may know the lovely Michael Jordan video, where he talks about all his failures, how many times he failed
Oh yeah.
when it came to a game-winning shot, how many games he lost, how many times he missed. And at the end of, and that is why I succeed. In fact, there is research on this. So Dean Simonton from the University of California, Davis, has done research on very successful people throughout history. These are the most successful scientists and artists. And one of the characteristics that he identified in them was that they, much more than their contemporaries, much more than people in their field, they failed. They failed over and over again. Thomas Edison, for example, said, "I failed my way to success." So this is my first response to your question. How do I set goals and then succeed? Yes, I succeed, and yes, I fail over and over again. Specifically in terms of setting goals, you mentioned self-awareness, Max, and that is key, which is why, for me, one of the most important tools, maybe the most important tool for goal setting and for many other things, is journaling. There's a lot of research on the benefits of journaling, of sitting down and asking yourself questions and then responding to it. Questions such as, what is really important to me? What do I care about? Where do I want to see myself 5 years from now? What is meaningful to me? And writing about these things is priceless, is very important. So I write a lot. I spend a lot of time reflecting, and then I set goals. And I must say, I'm not afraid of changing those goals. So if I see that I'm not connected to the goal, if I see that I'm not connected to the goal for me, and sometimes the answer is yes, and I have to slug through it, experience the unpleasant journey at times, and sometimes I say, oh no, well, maybe this is the wrong goal. I want to recalculate and go in a different direction. But self-awareness is a critical element, and much self-awareness can come from journaling.
Oh, that's so important for sure. And thank you for sharing that. And actually, that was literally going to be my next question, which I ask every single guest of mine, which is, what's your favorite failure? So we always love to celebrate failures on the show. So you already mentioned one failure, but do you have a favorite failure?
I guess biggest, at least career-wise, failure is that from a very young age, I wanted to be a world squash champion. I did not become a world squash champion. However, it was this failure to accomplish my goal that has really defined so much of what I do today, because I think sports is such a gift, and sports at a high level, or any experience at a high level, is such a gift because it teaches us important lessons. One important lesson is to learn how to fail, because Michael Jordan, who's arguably the greatest American athlete of all time, is a person who failed many times. It's through these failures that he succeeded, and even if he wouldn't have ultimately been the success that he was, there was a great deal of benefit to his career, or to the children. And think about it with my children. They play basketball, they dance. I really encourage them to do sports, and I encourage them also to do competitive sports. However, I always emphasize to them that the objective here is learning, it's growing, it's developing, it's improving. Winning is less important, far less important.
Yeah, absolutely love it. I think that's so important, especially teaching young children those lessons that both of us had to learn by accident almost, that like success in athletics is not the end goal, because it's not actually going to make you happy, but to enjoy the process and to develop skills and really learn how to fail, like you said, right? That can translate from athletics to business to school to whatever else you're going to do in life. So this ability to just fail and keep on going with the same enthusiasm and the same excitement is, I think, so valuable. So Tal, before I ask my final question, where can listeners connect with you online?
Most of my content is on my website, which is talbenshahar.com. And also, I have a relatively new initiative, which is an online school, Happiness Studies Academy. And the website is happinessstudies, one word, .academy. And there I have online courses, which I love because it provides me an opportunity to reach an audience globally.
So now, final question, what does mental mastery mean to you?
Mental mastery to me means mental flexibility. It's the ability to be able to embrace the difficulties and hardships, also to embrace those times when we're not mastering our emotional and cognitive life. It's the ability to life has to all that life provides us, the good, the bad, the failures, as well as the successes.